A white officer stops a black judge at the courthouse. What unfolds next is truly unbelievable. Leah Marshall, once again running behind, steered her sedan towards the New Orleans courthouse. A quick glance at the dashboard clock confirmed it. 10 minutes until trial. Her pulse quickened. This was the day she'd both dreaded and meticulously prepared for. The opening of a high-profile case that could redefine racial profiling in Louisiana forever. Stepping from her car, Leah inhaled deeply, squaring her shoulders. As an accomplished black judge, she had navigated her share of legal adversities, yet the weight of this specific case felt different. It wasn't just a case, it was deeply personal. The defendant, a young black man named Kevin Daniels, had been unjustly arrested in his own neighborhood. The detaining officer claimed he fit the description of a suspect, a phrase that resonated with all too familiar injustice for Leah. Leah strode across the parking lot, her heels clicking a rhythmic beat. Opting for a side entrance, she bypassed the main steps, which were already teeming with reporters, cameras poised. No time for a media circus. As she neared the side door, a young white police officer caught her eye. His rigid posture and intense gaze followed her approach. Leah reached for her ID badge, a routine gesture before entry. But before she could even present it, the officer blocked her path. "Ma'am, I need to see some identification," he stated, his tone sharp. Leah's eyebrows rose in surprise. "I'm Judge Marshall," she replied, holding the badge higher. "I'm presiding over the Daniels case this morning." The officer didn't even glance at the badge. His eyes, cold and calculating, swept over her. Leah felt a familiar anger simmer, but maintained a composed expression. "There's been an incident nearby, and you match the description of someone involved. I'm going to need you to answer a few questions," he continued, suspicion lacing his voice. Leah stared at him, trying to grasp the situation. The irony was suffocating. About to preside over a racial profiling trial, she was being racially profiled at the courthouse door. "Officer," she said, her voice steady despite her quickening pulse, "I don't have time for this. The trial begins in less than 10 minutes and I need to get inside." She extended her badge again, willing him to simply look and realize his mistake. But the officer stood firm, his hand hovering over his belt, near the handcuffs. "I don't care who you say you are, ma'am," he snapped, stepping closer. "You're going to need to come with me." Leah's breath hitched. This was escalating rapidly. She recognized the look in his eyes, a blend of suspicion and contempt she'd witnessed too often growing up in the South. It wasn't about her being a judge, it was about her being black. Before she could respond, another voice sliced through the tension. "What's going on here?" Leah turned to see an older black officer approaching, his face etched with surprise and concern. "Marshall?" His eyes widened in recognition. "Judge Marshall, yes," Leah confirmed, her voice tight. The older officer shot a pointed glance at the younger one. "Stand down," he ordered, his voice firm. The younger officer, still bristling, took a reluctant step back. "She matches the description," he muttered, more to himself. "That's the judge," the older officer snapped. "Do you want to lose your job?" The younger officer mumbled something under his breath, finally retreating completely. Leah forced herself to take a deep breath. She had to remain calm. Losing her temper now would only fuel someone like him. "Are you all right, ma'am?" the older officer asked, his voice softening. Leah nodded, her jaw still clenched. "I'm fine, thank you." Without another word, she turned and entered the courthouse, her heart still pounding. The familiar, sterile halls offered the comfort of routine. But as she walked, the scene outside replayed in her mind. She'd confronted racism her entire life, but for it to happen like this on the very day of this trial was almost too much. The courtroom quieted as Leah brought down her gavel, calling the room to order. The trial commenced smoothly with opening statements from both sides. Yet Leah's mind repeatedly drifted back to the officer outside, his sneering face, the instant judgment. It felt unsettlingly close to the case before her. Then came the first witness, Kevin Daniels himself. Leah leaned forward slightly as he took the stand. His testimony was raw and painful. He described being stopped by police simply for walking in his own neighborhood. He'd done nothing wrong, exhibited no suspicious behavior, yet was treated like a criminal, handcuffed and humiliated before his neighbors. Leah felt the profound weight of his words. She had heard countless stories like this before, but today it resonated differently. It wasn't just about Kevin Daniels. It was about the countless others, and it was about her. Midway through the testimony, the courtroom's back door creaked open and Leah's heart sank. The young officer from earlier, the one who had stopped her, entered. He made his way to the witness stand, his face pale and tense. Leah's eyes tracked him, every nerve on edge. The prosecutor stood, addressing the court. "We would like to call Officer Bill Wilkins to the stand." Bill Wilkins. Leah hadn't even caught his name before. She watched him take the stand, his movements stiff and awkward. She had to remind herself to remain impartial, to stay professional. But it was difficult. This was the same man who had seen her not as a judge but as a suspect. Wilkins shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. The prosecutor began questioning him, asking him to describe his role in Kevin Daniels' arrest. "I was patrolling the neighborhood when I saw Daniels," Wilkins began, his voice lacking the earlier confidence. He looked out of place, like he didn't belong there." Leah's grip on her gavel tightened. Out of place. That phrase. She'd heard it too many times. It was code for, he was black and I didn't think he should be there. The prosecutor pressed on, her tone sharp. "What exactly made Mr. Daniels look out of place, Officer Wilkins?" Bill fidgeted. He was acting nervous, looking around. It seemed like he was up to something. Leah felt anger rising again. She'd reviewed the case file. Daniels had been waiting for his rideshare. No crime, no suspicious behavior. He had simply been a black man in the wrong place at the wrong time in the eyes of the police. The prosecutor wasn't relenting. "Did you find anything on Mr. Daniels that suggested he had committed a crime?" Bill hesitated, his face flushing. "No," he admitted. "We didn't." The room fell silent. Leah could feel the tension building, thick and palpable. She glanced at the jury, observing their reactions. Some were clearly moved, others seemed conflicted. But the truth was undeniably clear. Kevin Daniels had been arrested for nothing more than being black. Bill's testimony continued, his story unraveling with each prosecutorial question. Small inconsistencies emerged, his version of events crumbling. Leah watched him closely, noticing his eyes repeatedly flicker towards her, filled with discomfort. He knew who she was now, and he knew exactly what he had done. When the prosecutor finally finished, Bill looked like a shell of the man who had tried to detain her. Leah felt no pity, but she deeply felt the gravity of the moment. This wasn't just about one case. It was about a system that had allowed individuals like Bill to operate unchecked for far too long. As the trial proceeded, Leah fought to control her emotions. She had to remain neutral to ensure justice was served. But it was arduous. The parallels between her personal experience and the case before her were impossible to ignore. By day's end, the courtroom buzzed with tension. The defense attorney delivered his closing statements, attempting to portray Bill as a well-meaning officer who made an honest mistake. But Leah knew better, and so did the prosecutor, Samantha Green. Samantha rose for her final argument. She turned to the jury, her voice steady and powerful. "This case is not just about Kevin Daniels," she declared. "It's about a pattern we've seen too often in our justice system. It's about officers like Bill Wilkins who see a young black man in a neighborhood and assume he must be up to no good. It's about how this assumption leads to wrongful arrests, to humiliation, to injustice. And it's time to say enough." The courtroom was silent as Samantha's words resonated. Leah felt the shift in the room. The jury was listening, they understood. When the trial finally concluded, Leah dismissed the courtroom for the day but remained seated for a moment. Her mind raced. She had done her job, presided fairly. But the encounter outside still gnawed at her. It was a stark reminder that no matter her position, no matter her accomplishments, she would always be viewed through the lens of her race. Suddenly, the courtroom door opened and Sergeant Michael Harris, the older officer who had intervened earlier, walked in. He approached the bench quietly, his face etched with concern. "Judge Marshall," he said softly, "can I have a word?" Leah looked up, surprised. "Of course." Harris sighed, glancing around to ensure their privacy. "I wanted to talk to you about what happened earlier with Wilkins. He's not a bad kid, you know, but he's got blind spots like a lot of them do." Leah met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Blind spots," she repeated, her voice tinged with bitterness. "You mean racism?" Harris winced but didn't argue. Maybe. Probably. But I want you to know I'm trying to fix it from the inside. Leah studied him for a long moment. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that genuine change was possible. But after everything she had witnessed, everything she had experienced, it was difficult to cling to that hope. What do you suggest I do? She asked quietly. When I'm sitting up here day after day hearing cases like this, knowing what I've experienced firsthand? Harris was silent for a long time before finally answering. You keep doing what you're doing, Judge. You keep holding people accountable. That's the only way things are going to change. Leah nodded slowly, though the weight of her responsibilities still pressed heavily on her shoulders. The trial wasn't over yet and there would be more battles to fight. But for today at least she had taken a step forward. As Harris left, Leah glanced around the empty courtroom. She knew the fight was far from over, but today justice had been served. And that, she thought, was a start. The verdict and its echoes the following morning, the courthouse air was thick with anticipation. The jury had deliberated all night. Today would bring their decision. Leah Marshall sat in her chambers, seeking to ground herself for what would undoubtedly be a pivotal moment. Not just for this case but for many who had closely observed. This trial transcended one man's wrongful arrest. It concerned the very fabric of justice and the biases woven within it. Leah sipped her coffee, staring at the files on her desk. Outside she could hear the muffled sounds of reporters and protesters gathering. This was no longer a local story. News outlets nationwide had picked it up, transforming it into a symbol of systemic racism still plaguing law enforcement. Her mind wandered to the previous day's events. Bill Wilkins, the officer who had profiled her, had sat in that courtroom visibly shaken, comprehending how his testimony could dismantle the very system he belonged to. For all the courtroom's hushed silence, Leah had detected the subtle cracks in his voice, the tension in his face. Bill wasn't an anomaly, he was a product of a flawed institution. Leah understood that this case was about more than making an example of one officer. It was about propelling a conversation America had long avoided. She had a duty to deliver justice in this specific instance, but the weight of broader responsibility was crushing. This trial symbolized a larger issue, the imperative to reform a system where bias and profiling had become standard practice. A knock on the door startled her back to reality. "Come in," Leah said, her voice steadier than she felt. Her clerk, Emily, entered holding a folder. "The jury's ready," she said softly. Leah nodded, rising from her chair. She took a deep breath, smoothing her robe. "Let's do this." As she made her way to the courtroom, her footsteps echoed through the hall. The courthouse felt different today. The tension wasn't confined to the courtroom. It permeated everything, an unspoken anxiety shared by all. Inside, the atmosphere was stifling. Reporters filled the gallery, pens poised, cameras ready. The families of both Kevin Daniels and Officer Wilkins sat in the front rows, both groups taut with anticipation. Leah took her place at the bench, glancing briefly at Kevin Daniels, who sat with his lawyer at the defense table. His face was somber, yet a glimmer of hope shone in his eyes. A hope for justice, a hope that this trial might actually mean something. She shifted her gaze to Bill Wilkins. He looked far less assured than the day before, his eyes darting nervously around the room. For the first time since the trial began, he seemed diminished, like a man who had finally comprehended the inescapability of his actions. Leah cleared her throat. "Please bring in the jury," she said, her voice echoing in the quiet room. The doors opened and the 12 jurors filed in. Leah watched them carefully, trying to discern their expressions, but their faces were unreadable, their eyes fixed straight ahead. The jury foreman, a middle-aged woman with dark hair pulled back into a tight bun, held a slip of paper in her hand, clutching it like a lifeline. Leah nodded toward her. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman stood, her hands shaking slightly as she unfolded the paper. "We have, Your Honor," she said, her voice trembling just enough to betray the gravity of the moment. "Please read the verdict," Leah instructed, her own heart pounding though she maintained her composure. The foreman glanced down at the paper before looking up again, her voice firming. "In the case of Officer Bill Wilkins, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of wrongful arrest and racial discrimination." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Leah glanced at Kevin Daniels, who sat frozen, his face blank for a moment before relief began to wash over him. His lawyer patted him on the back and Kevin's eyes began to glisten, though he blinked away the tears. Leah then turned her gaze toward Bill Wilkins. He was staring straight ahead, his face pale, his hands clenched tightly. The weight of the verdict had clearly struck him, and for a moment, it seemed as if he might break. She banged her gavel once. Court is adjourned. But as the room began to stir, reporters scrambling, people filing out, Bill suddenly stood. "Your Honor," he said, his voice cracking. Leah paused, looking down at him. The courtroom quieted again, all eyes turning to the young officer. He was visibly shaking, his face pale as he struggled for words. I need to say." He swallowed hard, his gaze falling to the floor. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting the community. But I was wrong." His voice wavered, thick with emotion. "I see now that I let my assumptions, my prejudices cloud my judgment. And I'm sorry." The silence in the room was deafening. Leah felt her breath catch in her throat. It was an apology, yes, but it wasn't enough. It couldn't undo what had been done. She thought about all the time she had been in Kevin's shoes, stopped for nothing more than being black, and she knew this apology, however sincere, wouldn't erase those experiences. She met his eyes, her voice steady but firm. "Your apology is noted, Officer Wilkins. But the harm caused by your actions, by actions like yours, runs deep. It affects lives, families, and entire communities. Saying sorry doesn't fix that." Bill nodded, looking defeated. He didn't try to argue, didn't try to explain further. He simply stood there, accepting the consequences of his actions. And for the first time, Leah saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. The courtroom slowly began to empty. Leah remained seated for a moment, watching as Kevin Daniels hugged his family, his face a mix of relief and exhaustion. Bill Wilkins stood quietly by the exit, waiting to be escorted out, the weight of his guilt heavy on his shoulders. Leah's mind raced. She had done her job, upheld the law, and presided fairly. But it wasn't enough. This trial was just one drop in a much larger ocean of injustice. For every Kevin Daniels who received a semblance of justice, there were countless others whose stories would never be heard, whose cases would never reach a courtroom. Suddenly, the courtroom door opened again and Sergeant Michael Harris walked in. Leah looked up, surprised to see him. He approached her quietly, his face a mix of concern and something else. Something like hope. "Judge Marshall," he said softly, "can I have a word?" Leah nodded, gesturing for him to sit. "Of course." Harris sat down, folding his hands. "I just wanted to say thank you." Leah raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For handling this case the way you did," Harris replied. "For holding us accountable. We need that. The system needs that." Leah let out a long breath, leaning back in her chair. "I appreciate that, Sergeant, but it doesn't feel like enough. This was just one case. There are so many more out there, so many people who don't get justice." Harris nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You're right. But that's why we have to keep pushing. It's not going to change overnight, but every step matters. Every case like this chips away at the bigger problem." Leah was silent for a moment, considering his words. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that change was possible. But after everything she had seen, it was hard to maintain that hope. "What about Wilkins?" she asked quietly. "What happens to officers like him, ones who've been taught to think a certain way?" Harris sighed. "I'm not gonna lie, it's hard. There are a lot of guys like him. But there are also people like me trying to change things from the inside. And I'll keep doing that as long as I can." Leah looked at him, seeing the weariness in his eyes but also the determination. It was the same determination she felt, despite the setbacks, despite the frustrations. "You keep doing what you're doing, Judge," Harris said. "That's how we change this. Piece by piece." Leah nodded slowly. "Piece by piece," she echoed. As Harris left, Leah sat back in her chair, staring at the empty courtroom. The fight wasn't over. It never would be. But today they had taken one step forward. And that, she thought, was how change began. A lingering impact as the courtroom emptied and the echoes of the verdict still lingered. Leah Marshall remained seated at the bench. Her mind buzzed with the weight of what had just transpired. Yet it wasn't a victory she could simply savor. The trial was over, but its profound impact had only just begun. For Leah, the fight for justice wasn't confined to this room. It stretched far beyond these walls, into communities still grappling with the very issues that had brought Kevin Daniels here. She stood up, gathering her files when a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Kevin Daniels approaching with his attorney. His face was calm now, though the tension of the past few days had clearly worn him down. "Judge Marshall," Kevin said, his voice low but steady, "I just wanted to say thank you for everything." Leah looked at him, pausing before responding. "You don't need to thank me, Kevin. I was just doing my job." Kevin shook his head. "No, it's more than that. This trial, it wasn't just about me. It was about showing people what really happens out there, what we go through. You gave me a voice." Leah's chest tightened. She understood what he meant and she nodded. "I hope this is a step toward change," she said, her words carefully chosen. "But it's just one case. We still have a long way to go." Kevin's eyes softened with understanding. "I know. But it's a start. And for that I'm grateful." Leah watched him leave, his attorney close behind. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was so much more left to be done. One trial, one verdict wasn't enough to dismantle a system built over centuries. But she knew Kevin was right. It was a start. She sighed and began to make her way to her chambers, her footsteps slow and deliberate. The media had already swarmed the front entrance, so she chose the side door again, hoping to avoid the inevitable cameras and microphones. But as soon as she pushed open the door, Leah found herself face to face with Officer Bill Wilkins. He was standing by the side of the building, leaning against the wall, his face drawn and pale. His uniform seemed too large for him now, as if the trial's weight had diminished him. Leah stopped short, her heart thudding. For a moment neither spoke. The tension between them was palpable. A mixture of guilt, anger, and confusion hung in the air. "Judge Marshall," Bill began, his voice hoarse. He straightened up, his eyes locking onto hers. I didn't expect to see you here." Leah remained silent, waiting for him to continue. She didn't know what he could possibly say that would change anything, but she allowed him the moment. "I've been thinking," Bill said slowly, his words heavy, "about everything. About what happened in there and about what I did to you." He paused, his hands fidgeting at his sides. "I know saying sorry isn't enough. It won't fix what I did. But I need you to know I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Leah's eyes narrowed. She had heard this before, countless variations of this apology. "You didn't mean for it to happen?" she repeated, her voice cold. "But it did happen, Officer Wilkins. And it keeps happening, to people like Kevin, to people like me. So forgive me if I'm not moved by your remorse right now." Bill winced but didn't back down. "I know I screwed up. I know I let my biases take over, and I'm trying to understand that now. But it's not as simple as just unlearning everything overnight. I've been taught to see things a certain way, and I didn't question it until now." Leah crossed her arms, her face still stern. "And what changed now? The fact that you got caught, or the fact that someone finally called you out on it?"